So, hello everyone. My name is Jihan, and you are now live with Never Stop Learning with Joe Miller, the author of the vaccine slash Projekt Lightspeed. So, we are here tonight to discuss this awesome book. Joe has taken his time for being with us. Joe, thank you for being with us today and for taking your time, first of all.
No, thank you for having me, Jian. A pleasure.
Thanks a lot. And tonight it will be something like, let's say, we are sitting at a table in a bar, right? So we got a friend. His name is Joe. He has written an awesome book somehow, right? It happened to be the awesome story of the century. And we're sitting here together. We've read the book. Some of us have, some of us have not. And we will just first get to know each other, and then we will deep dive into the story of how Professor Uğur Şahin and Professor Özlem Türeci have developed together with their team the vaccine, and how Joe happened to be there at the right time at the right place, and how he has written down this book. So we are live right now on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and Facebook, on YouTube, and we will have the chat, which is somehow compromising everything from the different platforms. Feel very free to comment and to put down your notes in the chat if you like. At a certain period of time, we will be very free to put them, to grab them. We plan with something like an hour plus minus, right? And then I think we will have had a very nice book circle. So maybe this could be the overall title of tonight: a book circle on the vaccine. So these are the books, by the way. So everyone who is listening, Projekt Lightspeed. This is the German version, and the vaccine is the English version. But before diving deep into the book, Joe, please tell us, who are you? How have you become what you are right now? And what's your story?
Existential questions there, Jian. Who are you? Well, my name is Joe Miller. I am a journalist at the Financial Times. I based in Frankfurt. And I cover sort of German industry, tech, a bit of sort of social stuff, economy. Before that, I worked for the BBC for almost 7 years in different places around the world. In London, of course, but in Berlin, in New York, in New Delhi. And I thought that this would be a sort of a quiet beat, relatively quiet anyhow for the Financial Times. I mean, there's some big companies around, but compared to, say, San Francisco, it's quieter. And then 4 months after moving here, the pandemic hit us. And I would love to say that I had some kind of prescience, and I knew, that there was going to be a German vaccine that would be the first and the most efficacious one out there. But I didn't. I was just, as you said in your intro, I was just very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. And I can go into the story of how I got to know BioNTech if you like. And that was, so I'm, as I say, sitting here in Frankfurt. And sometime in January, I was actually more aware of COVID-19. It wasn't called COVID-19 yet, of course. It was, I don't believe it was even called the coronavirus. It was just this pathogen, this flu-like, with flu-like symptoms that had emerged in China. And I was slightly more aware of it than most because as part of my job, I cover the car industry. And of course, as you will know, Jian, a lot of the car industry's profits these days are in China, and many of the German car makers have large plants in China, and they were being closed down one after the other. And so I was starting to write about that and try to find out what was going on. And Clive Cookson, around the same time, he's the FT's science editor, very, very nice man. He called me and he said, hey, we're looking into the various, companies around the world that may be looking at developing a COVID vaccine. Why don't you look at these companies in Germany? And so I spoke to CureVac and I spoke to BioNTech and actually a couple of others as well who didn't make it very far into the race. And BioNTech got back to me very quickly and said, "Hi, would you like to speak to this guy, Uğur Şahin?" And I thought, sure, why not? He sounds interesting. I didn't know the first thing about mRNA, and you can be the judge of whether I know anything about it now, but I didn't know anything about immunology or vaccinology. But Uğur, over Zoom, he was incredibly patient, and he sort of went through it all with me as if I was in school. And at the end of our hour-long chat, I remember thinking, this guy's interesting. He runs this company with, with his wife and a very accomplished scientist in her own right, Özlem Türeci. You know what? I'll keep in touch with the company, and then I'll probably write a story at some how difficult it is to develop a vaccine in a pandemic and how they failed. And just sort of give an insight just give an insight into sort of the challenges that are involved. And it wasn't until, certainly not until July, August, that I began to realize, after checking in with the company and with Uğur, very regularly, that hang on, this might be it. And it was because Uğur said, one of our phone calls, he said, this is about as good as it gets. And that's when I realized I was I was sitting on a dream of a story, really.
Wow. A dream of a story. I mean, this is exactly it. So, in the book, you say it's mid 2021, right? When you just write the book, but you heard from the virus due to your China and automotive researches in January 2020. And when was your first touch point with Uğur Şahin then? When was it?
Sometime in February, I think. Yeah. And then we kept in touch. So we were in touch every few weeks, and not just me and Uğur, but Özlem as well. And then increasingly, many of the other brilliant scientists who, unfortunately, in telling the narrative, you can't just bombard the reader with a whole load of different names, because it gets very difficult to read. But really, they all deserve a book of their own. They're extraordinary scientists and extraordinary people. And I was, they were very kind that while they were involved in this Projekt Lightspeed, they took time out to talk to me every now and then, and were incredibly generous because, as I say, I'm not an expert, and so I was asking idiots questions, and so it was a sort of regular check-in. I never ever saw anyone in person because of the pandemic, obviously, and anyhow, they were all in their home office, so there was nowhere to go to meet people. And it was only in November 2020, after the big announcement that there was an efficacious vaccine, that I finally went to meet Uğur in Mainz, and had a coffee with him in his office. And when we started to discuss the possibility of writing a book, until then I was writing these pieces for the Financial Times, and then I wrote a few big pieces at the end of 2020, the end of last year, and especially because we named them the FT People of the Year, so we did a big piece around that. But the idea for the book was when we were sitting there, sort of in his very small white office at the top of the Under Goldgruber headquarters.
So before going into the German dream, right, what is out there with Uğur Şahin and Özlem Türeci, tell us more. How has it developed from the first discussion with them about, hey, there is something ongoing, we're doing stuff, until then the periods of times when they have been, for example, I remember at the very first chapters where he would grab all his 30-inch monitors in special luggage for going somehow offsite and still doing his research. How have they developed over time, and how have you experienced the going further of the project?
Well, as people, I always tell people that Uğur Şahin and Özlem Türeci are exactly as they come across. There's almost no difference between the way they present in public and the way they are privately. They are, I don't think they would mind me saying this, they are geeks. They love science. They love studying. They don't own a TV. They don't drive a car. they spend an awful lot of their free time either working out or reading scientific journals, more Uğur than Özlem, because Özlem has a life. But
You're talking, right? So just what
I'm joking. Yeah, I'm joking. I'm just teasing. You know, the anecdote you mentioned there is a good example that when they go on holiday, Uğur packs a suitcase full of electronics, including his printer and his screens and all of that, so they can carry on working, because they never really take time off in the way that normal people would, I suppose. And actually, I only found out after the book was published, when I was having a discussion with Uğur, and someone brought up the computer monitors thing. And like with almost everything in his life, it turns out that he'd been reading a paper years ago, a scientific paper that said that you're more productive if you have, I think it was, he said you're 30% more productive if you have 2 monitors or something like that, and that's why he takes them with. And so his life is very much ruled by these kind of things. You know, he's always trying to optimize his productivity and to get the most out of his time. But he's also a very human person and a very warm person. And I think that's one of the things that's remained constant. You asked me what's changed from the beginning till now. And I would say very little. He's a very trusting, they're both very trusting people. One of BioNTech's senior scientists said that this is perhaps the most Turkish thing about them, is that they've got a very, you know, warm and familial attitude to their staff. Everyone in BioNTech is on du basis rather than Sie. They, I mean, the reason I was in a place to write this book really was because we hit it off, and he trusted a journalist that he didn't really know and had no real reason to trust, I guess, based on the way we got on and you know, a certain amount of mutual respect. And I think that really typifies him as a person. Very little I can attest, because, you know, I'm still friends with them. Very little about their lifestyle has changed since November 2020. You know, since they became world famous, it's pretty much the same, business as usual.
Wow, wow. I remember at a point in the book where their flat would be a topic that is, I don't know, that they are living in a flat in the city of Mainz because they enjoy short ways to the office and being at the central, and as you said, it's still no changing in lifestyle. This is, I mean, this is so amazing how people can dedicate their whole life to something. And with the startups, what they have founded before, and with everything what they had, no one at no point would say, okay, this is going to be something, right? So no one ever would say it. And also their investors, right? So they had really patient investors with them who would accompany them for a really long time. And what do you think? How did they tell the story of Ganymed before, and also new technology, then BioNTech, right? To the investors, what was their? How did they the world inside of their brains and their heart to change the world? How did they have, even though they are no business guys or sellers, how did they have transported that to their investors?
You're very right to focus on that, because in many ways, and I write this at the end of the book, the true miracle is that 2 people like Özlem Türeci and Uğur Şahin made it through the sausage factory that is the VC world and the biotech world, and emerged with not 1 but 2 successful companies, because everything in the system is set up to essentially ignore or overlook people like that. As you will know, you know, and as people who are watching will know, you know, you have VCs who generally have a very committed investment cycle, and they want to exit by whatever it is, 5 years, you know, down the line. And that means they're most interested in whatever innovation will get there first, not necessarily in the best and you know, most groundbreaking innovation. They just want to make good on their returns. And even to get that kind of money in the first place, it's quite difficult. You need to have published quite a lot in various big journals, scientific journals. And often they want people with a business track record. And none of these things describe Uğur, Şahin, and Özlem Türeci. To begin with, they are, they weren't entrepreneurs at all. They were both trained to be doctors, and they'd become cancer immunologists because they met in this hospital in Saarland, and they were dismayed by how few options there were for the blood cancer patients they were looking after, and they bonded over this shared goal to try and find some better cancer therapies. And they made their way through various different technologies, and one of the technologies that they worked on at the time was mRNA, which ended up saving humanity 30 years later. But it was a very long journey from there to the biotech that you see today. And it wasn't the traditional journey. Uğur went off to Zurich to do a sabbatical there. Then they both ended up together in Mainz with Christoph Huber in the Johannes Gutenberg University in an oncology department. They struggled through various different experiments with things like peptides and other technologies, none of which really were as promising as they'd hoped. They tried to shop some of their early innovations like mRNA to big pharma, and no one was interested at all. And so they went into to build a company called Ganymed, which did monoclonal antibodies, which is a much more established drug class, but wasn't what they were there to do. There wasn't like a sort of revolutionary idea like mRNA vaccines. And even that they managed to turn into a decent business, but they had a very difficult time with it because the investors wanted out and because they weren't given enough time to bring their products to fruition. And so by the time they got to the 2000s, they were two very accomplished scientists in a certain, in a lab setting, who had periodically published some papers, but not at the sort of not prolifically, not at the sort of rate that the star entrepreneurs and biotech founders would. And what's more, they hadn't been to America, which is a big deal. And as you'll know, most German scientists end up studying in America or going via America at some point. And there's this whole culture of in America gewesen kind of idea, and they were outside of that ecosystem. And they were incredibly lucky that at some point they were introduced to these two Bavarian billionaire twins, the Strungman brothers, without which I think it's fair to say without them there would be no coronavirus vaccine today. And they'd already made their money, and they wanted a project, and they were taken by Uğur, Şahin, and Özlem Türeci's personality. And I described the meeting in Munich at which the investment decision was made in the book. But what's so key, to come back to my original point, was so key is that the reason that the Strungman brothers made this investment, Thomas Strungman will tell you until today that he still doesn't understand the science. He made the investment based on these people's personalities. And at the heart of this story is a story about two people's personalities. And the reason I ended up writing the book was because I was taken by Uğur's personality. The reason they got the funding from the Strungman brothers was because of their personality. And we have a system that doesn't capture that because there's no way of transferring that into a slide deck. And these are people who, didn't fit into our preconceived ideas of who will be a successful, innovator or scientist, etc. And a big lesson from this story for me is that we need to revise our idea of value and where it comes from, because it's literally a miracle that these people slipped through the net.
Wow! It's I'm taking notes, trying to write.
Don't take notes, Jan. It's all in the book. It's okay.
True that. But getting it from you on the with the tone and with everything what you experienced is some more. I mean, now I think from the audience, all the startup and VC guys are having great ears because. Also, at several points in Germany, like we have lots of great science over here, right? All over Germany, but I mean, not much business, right? And people, as you said, they either go to the States, or the big startups are coming from China. And at the end, lots of science is, at least, for example, the papers with AI content are in the States of more than 80 to 90% financed by big corporates or big startups, right? In order to bring science into business. And this is something, but the point
it's an enormous problem. Yeah, it's an enormous problem. If you look at the stats, and I don't have them to hand, so I'll estimate that Europe per capita has more IP filings and publishes more in major journals than the US. And then when you look at how many of those innovations are transferred into, a commercial entity or into products, the Europe and especially Germany. And so there's this big gap in this country. The expertise is here. The institutions are here. There's world-class institutions. You look at, not even necessarily in biology. You look at the Fraunhofer Institute, for example. Enormously established and capable institutes. And yet, what happens to the people who go through them? They end up in the US a lot of the time. It's interesting you mentioned that, because it's so pervasive, this idea that people with good ideas in Germany end up going to the US or somewhere else, that I was at a talk the other day by a very famous German oncologist who said, BioNTech, which is registered in Holland or whatever, but it's not true, as in BioNTech is actually, to its detriment, registered in Germany. But so pervasive is this idea that he probably just thought, of course it's registered somewhere else, why would it be registered in Germany? And I think that goes to the heart of the issue, and I hope this new government is alive to that, if they want to make sure there are more BioNTechs in the future.
I mean, VCs do not invest in ideas or in companies, in projects. VCs invest in people, and this is exactly what happened with the Schwingmann brothers, with Professor Şahin and Professor Türeci, and to Mainz, it was just in the news, right? That Mainz is full of tax income and does not know what to do.
Yes, indeed. Well, they do know what to do with it, I think, because they have a lot of debt. So I think they're paying off their debt first. But I mean, Mainz is a sort of microcosm of what I was saying earlier. Here's a city that got very lucky, and it has a world famous company in it. But the question is, what they're going to do to make sure the next world famous company is also in Mainz. And it's the same problem that Germany has, really.
Exactly. But now let's coming back to the book and the story again. I've taken a note with Big Pharma. So there are pages on the book when going into discussions with Pfizer. It would really be very stressful for all the people, for the lawyers of BioNTech, right? And day and night getting together the papers and whatnot. And at a certain period of time, again, Uğur Şahin coming in saying, "No, guys, we will do it." And he just says, "Yeah, let's do it," and overcomes all the issues with the lawyers. How have you experienced that, like David and Goliath at that point?
At the time it was definitely a David and Goliath relationship, but it must be said that even before COVID, BioNTech was a savvy organization, and it was a savvy organization because Uğur Şahin and Özlem Türeci attracted some very interesting talent to the company, including Sean Marrett, who is the chief business officer, who'd come from GlaxoSmithKline and been through a bunch of other biotech companies, and is a really sort of shrewd operator, a Brit. In the book, I compare him to Ray Winston, if anyone knows who that is. Yeah, a British actor, who's often in like Guy Ritchie movies and things like that. And Sirk Putting, who is the CFO at the time, he's now there's now a new CFO. He's doing other stuff, chief operating officer, I think. And these people operated right from the beginning on this basis that BioNTech would not undersell itself. It would not be bullied into being, bought up by big pharma, because traditionally that's what happens. Traditionally, if you're a company the size of BioNTech's, at some point you push your innovations to the limit of your budget, right, or to the limit of your VC backers' budgets, and at that point, pretty much you're prey for big pharma. So if you want to go further with it, you either do a licensing agreement, in which case the vast share of the profits go to big pharma, or you pretty much get acquired. And BioNTech from the beginning tried to do it differently. They tried to they did a couple of licensing agreements in the first place, but then they tried to do 50-50 agreements, and they pushed for 50-50 agreements because there was a broader vision behind it, and there still is a broader vision behind it. There were 120 odd different projects at BioNTech, and there's now in all sorts of areas, mostly in different cancers, but also lots of different infectious diseases. Things like multiple sclerosis has now been added to the roster, and it was always Uğur, Şahin, and Özlem Türeci's vision that they would take the revenues from whatever they managed to sell to big pharma or partner with big pharma on, and use it for other things. And that playbook was in place when it came to the coronavirus and COVID-19. There was already an established relationship with Pfizer because they were working together on a flu vaccine, and they were in the driving seat in some way, because if you look again, people often ask the question, why didn't big pharma come up with a vaccine first? Where was Merck? Where was Sanofi? Where was GSK? And Pfizer only had it because they partnered with BioNTech. And the answer is that that's not a surprise. If you look at the history of big pharma of the last 30 years, they generally buy in their innovations. They're not very good at reacting, incredibly quickly. They're massive. They're tankers that don't turn around that quickly. So what happens is, if you look where at the products and innovations, they come from spin-offs from universities or by acquisitions, big pharma's acquisitions. So Pfizer, that, to their credit, started to take COVID-19 quite seriously towards the end of February, needed a partner, and it had a ready-made partner with BioNTech because they invested, and there was a very good relationship between Katrin Janssen, who's the German-born scientist who leads vaccines at Pfizer. Uğur and her had a good relationship. So going in, there was this understanding that it would be a 50-50 relationship. But that's all very well said and done on paper. In practice, as you point out, there were a lot of tensions, especially at the beginning, when every single part of the process has to be decided upon. Who has the final say on candidate selection? Who has the final say on when we go ahead with phase 2? Who has the final say on which countries we expand the trial to, etc., etc., etc. And there were lawyers in rooms going through all of this, but it was taking far too long until you mentioned that Uğur sort of intervened and said, let's just do whatever we need to do, give away whatever rights we need in order to get this through. And I think that's a very illustrative moment, because that's how he operates. But also the fact that they were already in a situation where they had some protection is because he has other people around him who operate in a way that he doesn't, and that sort of collaboration works very well. He has people looking who have his back, let's put it that way, who have his and Özlem's back in the company, and who were there to literally make sure that they weren't screwed, and who did a very good job of that. With one exception, I should say. They didn't foresee the fact that, or they should have perhaps foreseen the fact that their name, that BioNTech's name, would essentially be lost in the publicity of it all. That if you go to America, for example, it's just the Pfizer vaccine, and perhaps a big pharma company in that position would have had some concerns about that earlier on, but that's a small thing in the grand scheme of things.
Fair enough. I mean, if you talk to friends abroad, then it's always if you tell the story that you get the BioNTech vaccine, people are like, which vaccine is this? poor guy, what did you get? No, it was the Pfizer one. Yeah, true that. So actually, his leadership style also then we can say is quite diverse, and he as a CEO on the one hand side, but also as someone who's scientifically and very intense in the topics, is creating the right teams around him to accomplish goals like this, right? So how would you describe his leadership style from your perspective?
It's a very good question, because as I was writing this, at some points I was thinking maybe I should use an analogy to describe his leadership style. Like, is he a bit like Steve Jobs, or is he a bit like, X, Y, or Z? But he didn't fit neatly into any of these categories, because he's a delegator in many ways, but he understands how to delegate and understands whose strengths fit to what. But on the other hand, people who work for him will tell you that he's in the details. So even once he's delegated to you, he'll be on top of you. He'll be, checking in, and he sometimes will know the details of the project better than you do. He's got a very strong understanding of people's motivations, I would say, and this is true even for when he was working with me. I remember one day we went for, and he said to me, why did you want to become a journalist, and what motivates you? And he's genuinely interested in what drives people. And I think what he has a very good sense of is what people are enthused by and what drives them. And sort of, because he's had free hand in running this company, him and Özlem, he's managed to put people in positions that he knows they are passionate about, he's fit them into places where he thinks that they really passionate, and he can sense when people are starting to lose interest or starting to lose passion. And he would, as we were writing, as I was writing the book and I was, checking in and doing interviews with him every now and then, at some point he would say, "Are you still as enthusiastic about this project as you were?" And it wasn't accusatory. It was just interested. He wanted to know, have this feeling whether he has a very keen sense for when people are on the top of their game or not. And I think that has. And that has really helped him. But I think the other thing is that he has this goes without saying, he's a genius, but he's an exceedingly quick learner in almost any area, including entrepreneurship, including fundraising and all of these things. And he wouldn't put it this way because he's a very polite man, but he's a very strong bullshit sensor. So he even in an area which he knows nothing about, he will often, query, why does it have to be done that way? And very often it doesn't have to be done that way, and he's cut right through it to the heart of the matter. But on the other hand, he's a very kind person. He writes email. One of the things I really noticed is that he writes every email with a "dear so and so" and a "best wishes." Even in the middle of all of this, he never sort of fires off, "please get this done" or whatever. It's always a sort of, and he must be writing thousands of emails, I don't know, a day, and so there's a certain empathy there and an understanding of people's strengths that make him, a very good people manager, but not in any way. It's not easy to work for Şahin or Özlem Türeci, in that it's full on. It's, big things are expected. But he has a very keen sense of, where his employees are, and mentally, and where they're in, where their heads at, as we would say in English.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, now we've been talking a lot about Professor Şahin and not about Professor Türeci, due to the reason, I guess, also because somehow in our mindsets he's the foreign minister. Probably something like that, and she's the Minister of Interior. This is how it feels like, at least. I'm not talking about their personal life, right? About BioNTech. And is it like that? I mean, would you also could you also elaborate on Özlem Türeci's leadership styles, how she has been during the process, and also the differences between them, maybe?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the only reason I haven't mentioned her as much, is because the questions often are geared towards things that Uğur was involved in. But she's as pivotal to this success as Uğur is. And many people might not know this, but she was the CEO of Ganymed, their first company, and she was the one who took that through to its sale and its completion. That was their first big success. She was the driving force. She was also been the person who attracted a lot of the talent, who went about talking to Sebastian Kreiter, for example, one of the lead scientists now at BioNTech, and Mustafa Deacon, who came from Turkey. That was through Özlem. She was in charge of spotting these the talent. And the other thing that Özlem has done incredibly and through the years, and you only need to watch a BioNTech press conference to get a sense of this, is that she is incredibly good at zooming out and at explaining science to lay people. And to lay people, I mean, not just people like us, but also to investors and to politicians. And she's played a crucial role in really clarifying Uğur's science to people outside. I think the only person who really understands everything that Uğur's, that's going on in Uğur's brain is Özlem. Firstly, because she, you need to be a certain stature to understand most of it, and she is an extremely accomplished scientist. But also because she's able to sort of pick out the important bits, Uğur's the sort of person who would literally cover his walls in flip charts, and have a million ideas going on at once. And he knows what's going on. He has the capacity to keep them all in his head at once. But Özlem is the kind of translator between him and the rest of us a lot of the time. She's also incredibly she has a very light touch when it comes to incredibly complex tasks. Like, she was in charge of the phase 1 trial in Germany for BioNTech, and there was so many very bureaucratic hurdles to be overcome. And she's just it's thanks to her that we got into the clinic so quickly in April 23rd or something like that, because there's the Paul-Ehrlich Institute to deal with, and then there's the Ethics Commission in Baden-Württemberg and another one in Berlin. As I describe in the book, for example, in the last minute they decided that they needed PCR machines to test people who were coming in to get the vax, and that was in April 2020, when there were no PCR machines around. There were barely enough for the few people who desperately needed them. And all of this was sort of orchestrated by Özlem. And I never found her flustered, or never found her to be in any way sort of overcome by the weight of it. So yeah, she plays a pivotal role, and also in a clear-headed analysis of the science. I think you'll find few people out there who can explain cancer immunology to you in a better and more exciting way than Özlem Türeci. Wow. And lucky students at Johannes Gutenberg University, because she's just taken on a role there. So lucky them.
This would be a reason to study in Mainz, definitely.
Indeed, yeah. I'm sure it's already attracted people to Mainz, I'm sure.
Yeah. Before coming to the German dream version of our German dream side of all that, I would like to read out a part of the book, which I explained to you prior to going live, which has a connection to my negotiations class at WHU. So the scene is they are out there with I think it's the lawyer or someone from the Stringmann's family, right?
The head of their family office, yeah.
Exactly, the head of the family office.
Helmut Jägler.
Helmut Jägler, exactly, and they are somehow trying to figure out the percentages, so who's getting what, and how far are they being still backed, and how far can they go. And this is way before, by the way, way before the vaccine, right? It's still in the at what time was it?
2011 do I have, or 2000?
Exactly. Yeah. I think it was 11, exactly. And then they would be somewhere close to Frankfurt, out there in the Taunus, and it's about what percentage they would get from the company if they go on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we had it in negotiations class to broaden up and to directly come with creative solutions when negotiating. And there they say, als sie an den kleinen See das Herzstück des Parks erreicht hatten, war Jegle bereit, einen Vorschlag zu machen. By the way, you understand somehow German, right? We just speak English.
Ja, ich verstehe fast alles. Ja.
Okay. Auf einer Brücke stehend wandte er sich an Uğur. Komm, wir machen einen Deal. Wir geben euch 20% und legen 5% zur Seite. Wenn nach 5 Jahren alles gut läuft, wird Thomas euch diese 5% zurückgeben. Er streckte seine Hand aus. Uğur ergriff sie, hatte aber einen anderen Vorschlag parat. Genius, right? Machen wir es andersherum. Ich nehme 25% und wenn wir scheitern, gebe ich die 5% zurück. Jegle, der seine Bewunderung für Uğurs neu entwickelten Geschäftssinn nicht verhehlen konnte, lächelte und versprach, alles zu tun, um seine Chefs zu überzeugen. So, amazing. I mean,
yeah, amazing story. Yeah,
very, very
it was
nice
2008. Sorry, 2007, 2008. I should
2008.
clarify. Yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
right in the heart of the financial crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. And
which is a big part of it.
yeah. Let's make a focus on the German dream part. I mean, I've mentioned it several times now. What do I mean by German dream? Especially this year, it was a topic, right? Of course, because this year there would be the anniversary, the 60th anniversary of Turkish guest workers in Germany, right? So this year, 6 years ago in Bonn, there was actually it was, I guess. It was a 2 pages contract between Germany and Turkey that people from Turkey would come to Germany, work and leave again. And lucky us, the parents of those 2 geniuses, they decided to come and to stay and the rest is history, right? And for too long in Germany, this was neglected, right? This was Germany ist kein Einwanderungsland. Wir sind kein Einwanderungsland, for example. And,
even though 20 million Germans have a Migrationshintergrund. Yeah.
Exactly. And when people ask me about my story, about my life, and so far and so forth, I really like to emphasize the German dream, because we always hear from the movies and whatnot the American dream, from rags to riches, right? But I think there is a way more solid version of this dream, and this is the German one, that climbing up the ladder, even though you're coming from not the best parts of the society, is possible. It's not durchlässig yet, so there is no mobility in the social structures, but Uğur, Şahin and Özlem Türeci have experienced that. Have you at a period, at a certain point or somewhere, experience their background, how they are emphasized on that, right? They, by the way, for example, even though they are with Pfizer, they have this exclusive sales rights for Germany and Turkey, right? So there is something which I personally do like very much. And what do you think? What is out there? What is relevant in that context of the German dream?
You know, it's a very interesting concept. I hadn't thought about it in the same way until you just asked the question. And you're right, in many ways, you know, they are the best proponents of the German dream. What's interesting is, you know, I mentioned before that they hadn't studied in America, but one of the things I left out from the book is that actually, as young medical students, they went to America to tour the various campuses, you know, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, with the view to doing masters there or whatever it is, their doctorates, as most German students do. And they found it to be a place where there was much hype and not very much substance. And I bring that up just to show that they are in many ways very German, and they wouldn't like me for saying that, because they think of themselves as, well, I mean, they like Germany in many ways, but they think of themselves as being a little bit iconoclastic in the German society, as, you know, being able to see around the bureaucracy and all of that. But people who know them very well, and to me as an outsider, I would say that they are quite German in many ways. In fact, more German than most Germans I know. And Özlem Türeci, for example, has the best German language skills of anyone I've ever met. And I'm not perhaps the best person to judge that, but people who know her well and who've heard her talk and see her writing will tell you the same thing. Germans who see that. And so they're very much, they from a very early age, they were able to somewhat integrate into German society, at least to the extent that it allowed them to pursue their careers and to start a company in Germany, to attract German staff, to attract German investors. And for me, perhaps that's obviously something to celebrate, but perhaps the depressing part of this story is that needed to be pointed out, that this is when the vaccine success was first announced, most of the German headlines were about the children of guest workers who have made this vaccine, or the German Turkish scientists, etc. And I think that's the third or fourth most interesting thing about them. And the fact that they are wonderful scientists who are able to go through this the German system in as you point out, essentially in a meritocratic way, along with their German-born peers or of German origin, peers of German origin, and they were able to rise through a meritocratic system, all the way to the top. That's wonderful, but it shouldn't be the it should be the norm, really, rather than the exception. And perhaps it isn't the exception, but people like that aren't visible enough, because there clearly was a need by the German press to keep pointing out that these people were the children of guest workers. And to me it was like, well, there's something almost offensive in pointing that out, as you're sort of saying even people who are the children of guest workers can create a world-beating vaccine. Or to me it was like, well, of course, yeah, well, why not? Who cares where it comes from? And when you look at BioNTech itself, by the way, as a company, it's a company with people from all over the place. And I always say in interviews that if we would have had closed borders 20 years ago, we would not have had a vaccine, today. And that's not just true of BioNTech's vaccine, it's true of Moderna's vaccine, it's true of all the other vaccines out there. But it's certainly true of the BioNTech vaccine, that with closed borders, BioNTech wouldn't exist. It's like a United Nations over there, people from all over the place. Kati Karago is behind one of the innovations and the mod RNA platform that led to the vaccine. She escaped communist Hungary with a teddy bear stuffed with enough cash to basically get by for the first few days in America, and was shunned for years. And she's just one example of many. And so, yeah, I mean, if this is the German dream, I hope it's a recurring dream, and one that isn't worthy of that much comment in a few years' time.
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully it will turn out like that. But I think we still have some way to go. As someone myself was experienced that, even though third generation, right? So this is still an issue, and I hope that my children and maybe my grandchildren, the latest, will not have those issues. I mean, it's not about the issues anymore. It's about, right, there's this, okay, pointing it out, yes or no, pointing it out, and then pointing it back to I mean, it always pops up when people say, and are you going home for summer holidays? And then you're like, where home? I mean, I'm not driving to Dortmund this summer. I mean,
yes, exactly.
Home the other way. The home
yeah. And there's also, on the flip side, I think people who are perhaps well-intentioned, and there was a debate in the North Rhine-Westphalia parliament soon after the vaccine came out, in which Uğur, Şahin and Özlem Türeci were used as props, basically, by the CDU politicians, saying to the AfD, look, this is the sort of people you want to ban from Germany. But to me, we have to move beyond that, because that's almost saying that the only people who are worth letting into the country are those who the bar is quite high if you have to create a world-saving vaccine in order to be the sorts of immigrants who are useful to Germany. And I think that's also a bad dynamic to have this conversation in. It should be just we to move behind this definition of I don't really like the term Migrationshintergrund, for example, in Germany. I think it's a crude term. I understand why it exists, but I think it's time to move beyond that a little bit.
Definitely, and maybe with the new government and also with people in the government, we can push that further. Maybe we're going somehow ahead there. So I would say let's try first. Let's try now somehow going into the direction of the end, not directly, but I would like to. In German, I would say den Bogen spannen, right? Bringing the story to an end. I think it's almost the end of the book. Also, that you bring up this statistics from the States and also UK, how scientists have somehow calculated the return on people getting vaccinated, what that would mean for the world, right? And they here say vaccinated people at the end, in average, somehow 5 to 6K. I cannot find the right words to describe it. So that when people are vaccinated, it's better for the economy, right? So this is the core.
How much the economy saves, or how much less the economy loses per vaccinated person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think this number and also the development on getting the boosters now will further somehow go into directions of like let's ask it this way. What would you think? Do Uğur, Şahin and Özlem, Türeci think this is going to be something happening then every 6 months, and here for being very attached to the economy that we needed to keep the economy alive, or what was your insight when discussing with them the further ongoing of the pandemic? Also, I mean, no one can say directly, right? But what are your points there?
So I must say it's been a couple of months since I had this specific conversation with Uğur and Özlem. So it's possible that they've changed their minds in the meantime. But I think that they were both seeing this as being, after this booster that we should all be taking, then it's going to be sort of a yearly thing, like the flu, and coronavirus will become endemic, and we just have to deal with it like we do with the flu, especially with new variants, which is exactly how the flu works. There's new variants every year, and once a year should be enough. And I should say this: I have absolutely no reason to suspect that Şahin and Özlem actually have anything but the best intentions. But I also believe that we should not be talking to companies who make vaccines about how often we need vaccines. We should let independent public health officials make that decision. We now have the vaccines, so we can test them. Thanks to companies like BioNTech, we can test them independently, and we can have a centralized decision making from impartial sources. And I think that's important, not because I have any reason to distrust them, but because there are a lot of people who do distrust big pharma and who do distrust scientists. And the more impartial the system appears to be, the more vaccine confidence hopefully there will be out there. So that's the way I see it. But yes, I mean, the likelihood of coronavirus being endemic was always there as soon as we realized that we were never going to get to the point of herd immunity, because there's a solid 30%, up to 40% in some countries who will not take the vaccine, and therefore it will always be circulating. And not only will it be circulating, but it will be circulating under evolutionary pressure. So it needs to basically mutate in order to survive. And so we're almost making things worse by having this small minority that won't agree to be vaccinated. And so, yes, unfortunately, we will be living with it for a while. But the exciting thing about Şahin and Özlem Türeci is I think that this is, for them, very much a springboard to other to other things, back to their original task, which was to come up with cancer vaccines, cancer therapies. And so who knows, there may be some, scope for more books, perhaps by someone else, on the, on the next big thing out of minds. You never know.
Yeah. And also Şahin just released a picture of him getting vaccinated, right? In order to get rid of all these somehow weird.
Yeah, we were originally going to put that in the book, because there's a picture of both Uğur and Özlem getting vaccinated, 2 pictures. But there were no pictures in the book because of the time. We it was a really rushed print, and if you put pictures in a book, it makes the printing process more difficult and it would have taken more time. And so we didn't put it in. But I remember fighting for that, saying I think we should put it in for this precise reason. And I don't think even Uğur and Özlem understood the extent of it, because I would be getting questions. Wherever I did media, people would ask, have they taken the vaccine? It's such a strange question to ask. But it was the most common question by far. People just somehow, it's such a strange thing to suspect that these people made the vaccine and won't take it themselves. But it's by far the most common question I get till today, did they take their own vaccine? And I'm glad you put the picture out there, because hopefully, I'm sure people with conspiracy theories can, come up with conspiracy theories whether there's a picture or no picture. But yeah, I hope it helps somewhat.
Since we started,
and I took it too, by the way. So.
I didn't want to ask, because I don't know if it feels offensive. I mean, who knows, right? But I mean, it could be quite obvious that you're writing a book about
offensive. I haven't had my booster yet, but I will next week.
I get my booster, so inshallah, hopefully I get my booster tomorrow evening. I have my booster and BioNTech only, of course. Yeah. So we started with somehow a personal view of yours, and let's close it with personal views. So, Joe, what was your personal key learning or key learnings throughout the whole process, while writing the book, while being in touch with these amazing people, recapping the pandemic, writing, so being part of the pandemic somehow with providing reading stuff about the pandemic. When you would close the year, and actually we all are closing the year soon, what would you underline? What were your very personal key learnings?
Really, I must say that it was, for better and for worse, the understanding that the world changes through the actions of individuals. And I know that sounds a little bit like a fridge magnet sticker, or something like that, or a bumper sticker. But what I mean by that is that when the pandemic first started, I was still one of those people who thought, out there are people in charge. There's going to be an international response led by responsible individuals who corral all the greatest scientists together, and it'll be, organized well, and there will be an unlimited budget, and there are organizations out there, and there are structures out there to deal with this kind of thing. In other words, there are people in charge. And really, you slowly begin to realize that that doesn't exist. It wasn't just that these organizations failed. They didn't really exist in the form that we needed them to exist. There was no organization out there that was in charge of, procuring greenfield sites to put, vaccine manufacturing capacity on, for example. And then here you have a bunch of individuals who didn't even start out doing, infectious diseases research, who had, 12 people working in dedicated to infectious diseases in a company of 1,200, who just reading a magazine, Uğur was reading a magazine in January like the rest of us could, and to have that belief and say that I as an individual, or we as a very small team somewhere with the greatest respect in minds in the middle of nowhere, that we can actually do something, can change the world. The amount of belief you have to have to sort of take, to embark on that journey, I still find that amazing. And I think, the world basically moves because of people like that. And, you sort of know that in theory, perhaps, before you go into something like that. But to witness it up close, it just shows you the power of individuals, people just deciding to go for something, no matter how highly the odds are stacked against them. And you never know, you could literally end up saving the world. So, and it sounds a little bit mawkish, but I think that really is the lesson of this of this whole pandemic, that the top down approach has been far less successful than the bottom-up approach. And the bottom-up approach starts with extraordinary individuals.
The world changes through the actions of individuals. So later on, when I upload our talk on Spotify and write a short text on it, this will be the opening line of it. I think this really underlines what they have done, what Professor Uğur, Şahin, Professor Özlem, Türeci have done, and what you, lucky us, have came up with at the end as a book. So before closing, and one more question is coming in, and I think it's a really interesting one. Also, it's fitting to the closing of the session, and also with an outlook to the future. They say, so the question is, do you have an idea what the thoughts of Professor Şahin and Professor Türeci are regarding the pandemic, of the future of the pandemic, and also maybe after that? I think I would interpret the question like that. So how do they, I mean, no one can foresee the future, right? But what's next? Also the future with, I mean, are you writing a new book then later on?
Give me a break. I just finished. I'm not writing a new book yet, no, but I don't know, we may update it at some point if there's
maybe, right?
a need to, but I would say, yes, of course, no one can see the future, and I don't want to speak for Uğur, Şahin and Özlem Türeci, because they'll make a better job for themselves. But I think their main message has been throughout all of this, and when the first Kent variant came along, and now with Omicron, not to panic and to wait for the data and to make decisions based on what the data tells us. And so far, I think the data has thankfully erred on the encouraging side when it comes to the future of the pandemic. And we may still be in for a bit of a rough winter, but hopefully if we take our boosters and we get enough of the country boosted, or enough of the world boosted, then we can at least return to some kind of livable normality, if not normality as we've known it before. And I think that's probably the vision that they would share. Although, as I say, they talk quite regularly these days, so I'm sure they'll update us all on what they think the pandemic's future is as more data comes in.
Yeah. Well, also very, very iconic. Don't panic. Wait for the data. It could be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think Uğur told me once to get off Twitter, which I think is very good advice. So I haven't followed it, I must say, but it's good advice nonetheless.
So, guys, we have talked about the book Projekt Lightspeed in German, the vaccine in English, because the vaccine. Have we talked about it during our live session or prior to that? I think prior to that. Do you want to close with why the English version is the vaccine and the German version is Projekt Lightspeed, maybe?
Yeah, sure. In the UK and on the global stage, publishers felt that it needs to be made clear that this is the story of the vaccine, as in the vaccine that most of the people are out there have got. And as we talked before, in America, for example, people aren't necessarily clear that the Pfizer vaccine is this vaccine. So that was the point of that, very straightforward, hard-hitting title. Whereas in Germany, thankfully, most people know BioNTech and most people know Şahin and Özlem Türeci. So Rowohlt Verlag thought that we could go with a more adventurous title, and it seems to have worked. So hats off to them.
It definitely worked out. So I got very interested. I read the book in I think 2 nights, and it felt like a thriller, even though it was a non-fiction book. And I contacted you, Joe. You were so kind to be with us tonight with Never Stop Learning on our live stream. Thank you so much, Joe, for having been with us. Thank you to everyone who has listened on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and where not. And later on, it will be accessible on Spotify as well. And it was a very, very nice book round together with you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the invitation. And it was a really interesting and stimulating discussion. So thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks.